So thank you, John and Anna, for talking about your Flow project. To me, this is a very exciting project that brings together a lot of complex technologies, right? And how does one bring from the heart in community what could be perceived to be a very complex project in a very simple way? And that's what I think of when I think of systemic elegance. It'd be very easy to say, well, we've got 23 elements to this project, and they're all going in very complicated ways, and it's very difficult to understand. Or we can come and say, no, while that's also true, this is a project, this is something that happened in a community, or it's happening in a community, a couple communities, and where we're using the different technologies to support a specific kind of gesture, a way of looking at the future within the community for themselves and with themselves. And how you did that is just very cool. So I'd like to set a couple of just sort of the demographics of what we're talking about and where we're talking about. So this is in South Africa. This is in 2 townships. Please help me with the pronunciations. I know I'll get them wrong. Bergrivier or?
Bergrivier. So Bergrivier is a region, not necessarily
I wasn't even close to getting that one right. You were saying it's a region.
It's a region. The main town is Piketberg.
Excellent.
Which is a little bit easier to say.
In Kokstad?
It means a mountain. It means mountain river. Berg is mountain and river is river.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And it's a municipality at the at near the river mouth.
Excellent. And that municipality is in the Western Cape, yes?
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half north of Cape Town.
Excellent. So I think the population, the census a couple of years ago was 62,000 people in the municipality, and Piketberg's got about 12,000 people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then the other municipality was the?
Kokstad.
Kokstad. And the main town there is Kokstad. And that's in what's the name of the region? The KwaZulu-Natal?
KwaZulu-Natal. Yeah, KwaZulu-Natal. KZ or KZN. For sure.
And that's also got a population of around 66,000, so very similar size. And Kokstad is about 12,000 also.
And it's more concentrated. So Kokstad is more concentrated. So the Bergrivier region is more spread out. So there's, 10,000, 12,000, 5,000, whereas Kokstad is very much centralized around the actual town.
So it's more urban.
More of an urban rural town, if that makes sense.
Excellent. And one of the things I also love about your project is all the video and all the documentation that you have on the website, which I was just going through again, and it's just amazing. I know a little bit about how much that is to be able to say, this is what we did, and this is how we did it with these 6 different elements that you had, going through the smallest, beautiful, or family matters, and how all of those elements came together. So I thought that was really nicely done. So thank you. And the interactions that you were doing were from about September 2014 to about August 2016, right? So.
That's correct, yeah.
It was about 2 years, good. And you brought together a massive amount of stakeholders in this. So it was business and government, civil society, intersectoral, Meshfield, your company co-investing, the South African National Treasury, the Belgian Flanders State of the Art, the University of Cape Town, African Crisis and Development Initiative, the 2 townships that we just mentioned, and then a bunch of different experts in complementary currencies and participatory processes and researchers and a whole team of folks.
That's right.
And it's also very nice on your website, which we'll have the connection to, of listing all the different people and the kinds of roles that they had and the way that they intervened. So that's great. So if you could give us, we put sort of those dates in place. Now, sort of what is sort of the overall process that you went through over those couple years? Maybe even a little bit of sort of how you even saw this project, and then a little bit of the overview of the process over a couple of years. That'd be great.
Maybe the background.
Okay. So the project has a long history. And in many ways is a culmination of work that we've been growing individually and then together. And it was an opportunity to test a lot of ideas in a integrated way. We'd kind of tested some of them in different projects, but it was an opportunity to bring a lot of thinking together. So it sort of is a coming together of our respective interests and training as well as previous experience. The immediate genesis was through a project that we had been facilitating for the University of Cape Town for a unit called the African Climate. Looking at transdisciplinary collaborations around climate change, and based in a specific region. So we've been working in the Bergrivier region for some time before that, looking at possible projects that were linked to climate change and development as the primary focus. And prior to that, we've been working in Kokstad on a separate project which was an integrated sustainable development plan for that region. And on that project, we had tested some thinking that I'd kind of started developing many years before, which was working with young people to map their contexts in order to sort of form the basis for making creative design decisions as communities, to get beyond an expert-only approach to community design and planning and development. So these two processes kind of form the immediate seeds, the African Climate and Development Initiative project and the work in Kokstad with the Integrated Sustainable Development Plan. So it was on the back of that we had met many of our team members and had kind of built capacity to embark on a project of this nature. So that's the kind of immediate genesis of the project.
I mean, the other key element that came in, and it really came from our experience having worked in these two towns, is that often the challenges that we faced were that there were a large group of skilled but unemployed people. So there were resources, and there were real needs in the town, in the towns, and for whatever reason, there was a scarcity of South African rand, which is the national currency. So, one of the thoughts that we had is that, what if that could be bridged through a local complementary currency? So we both had many, many years of reading and interest in local and complementary currencies. So we thought that might be an innovative way to introduce or to start to shift the conversation, because often when you're talking to people about sustainable development or sustainability, or they glaze over. It's just unless there's the threat of there not being water in the tap, whereas then they're suddenly very interested. It's like, how can I solve the short-term problem, which is what we're having in Cape Town at the moment. Other than that, people just are not interested. And what we found quite interesting is that the minute you start talking about money or exchange, the energy lights up, and then they're much more open to conversations around issues around localization and local flows and materials and resources that are in the area, etc. So that's the kind of other key piece of the puzzle.
I mean, I think building on that it was a kind of growing awareness in our own work that our current financial system is premised on growth, and that from our reading, infinite growth is unsustainable, and to move towards a kind of more equitable and ecologically sound Earth, we need to get beyond that kind of financial system. So we were deeply curious about what it might be to look at other kinds of financial systems that would complement the current one. So it was a combination of my sort of earlier training as an architect and an urbanist linked to John's kind of deep interest in economics that sort of enabled us to really dive into this project. So.
Wow. So community participatory processes, complementary currencies, working with youth using the film and the storytelling as a way of storytelling, and engaging more abundance-based story of what they do have in their communities and the complementary currencies. So could you give sort of a sketch of those 2 years of what happened, sort of a brief overview of what, because all the details are wonderfully described with all these great pictures and movies and all of the videos of things like, uh-oh, there's a rainstorm coming right when we're launching. But sort of an overview of the interweaving of the Flow ambassadors and the video work and the storytelling and the narrative and the complementary currency. I know it's a lot to ask for the 2-minute version of the overview of all that, but sort of that kind of picture also would be great.
Cool.
That's good. So we started by selecting in each town. So we worked in both towns simultaneously, which was quite a task because they're far apart. Kokstad is an 8-hour trip from Cape Town. It's 3 hours from Durban, one of the other big cities. So it was, and Bergrivier is an hour and a half, 2 hours. So that was quite difficult to navigate. Anyway, we started in each city, in each town, with selecting young people, and these were people anywhere between the age of 18 and 35, and we were looking for out of work young people that had a matric, a school leavers, a matric, and that showed enthusiasm and interest in community development. So for the first part of the project, we worked with training these young people in basic sustainability issues. They learned how to make movies on iPhones, and the material of the movies was really beginning to tell stories of their local communities. And our initial focus was on economics, on mapping exchange.
Yeah. So one of the things was, once they'd learned how to tell a short 2-minute story using so they learned how to do everything from deciding on what story to tell, interviewing techniques, how to shoot it, how to edit it on an iMac, and then how to upload it to the YouTube channel. So it was a really compressed 1 week, fast track. And then in order for them to practice the process, we asked them to make short documentaries, which kind of were like adverts of what people did in each town. So that, for example, they would first map all the economic activity in the town. So they'd say there's a plumber here, there's someone that runs a car wash, there's somebody that has a little catering business, and they would map that on a physical map. And then what they would do is they would go to the people and make a short 2-minute, it's kind of like an advert, almost like a little short documentary. So that was part of them really kind of cutting their teeth and getting good at making movies. But at the same time, we were going to use those movies as a way to showcase the community back to itself, so that the community could see, wow, we want to go to all these big brand, national brand stores, but actually we have so much potential in our own community in terms of small businesses that already exists. And that was the kind of movie making economic side of it, and that was really just preparing the groundwork before launching the currencies. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I've just opened up the timeline to remind ourselves, because it's been 2 years, so it's quite good to have a look at it again. I mean, we called those little movies either Loving Local or Local Business, and the Loving Local were slightly longer movies that told the stories, and the Local Business ones were little 30-second adverts. And then through a series of, we had a kind of interweaved with that, we had a number of community meetings, which were to launch the idea of a community currency. And we interleaved these evenings with these movies that had been made by the young people. So that was a process of beginning to highlight what was working in the community. Another thing we did at the same time, linked to the Flow ambassadors, the young people's basic training, was we began to introduce them to the waste and the water systems in the area. so that they could begin to see, again, and always through the perspective of what's working, of using an appreciative inquiry lens. So not to always concentrate on the terrible things, because that's so often the way that development works. So the beginning of the project was very much an intense 3 months of this kind of mapping and storytelling. And then we did a survey, a baseline survey, that took about
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
With very interesting logistic challenges. And the intention of that survey was to provide us with a baseline for the businesses that we were targeting to have join the currency. And then what do we do?
Well, we had a number of community meetings in order to essentially sign up individual. But so the essence of the community currency was the community currency was a mutual credit-based system, which essentially means that the inception were small businesses that would be trading with each other, and then it would broaden to the rest of the community. And essentially the value of the currency would be backed by the goods and services of the small businesses that existed in these towns. So one of the main purposes of the community currency meetings was to educate people about what is the need for a community currency, and then to enroll them as the initial participants in the currency. And I think and that was sort of in preparation for the launch of the currency, which happened in May in 2015 in Piketberg, and then in July, I think, in 2015 in Kokstad. So we staggered them a little bit, so that was the kind of that was taking us the preparatory stage, taking us to the launch of these two currencies in these two towns.
That's great. You have the videos of the big posters of the currencies and people coming through the town and the opening of the boxes. Those are beautiful too.
Yeah.
So I mean, through that process, the Flow ambassadors were continuing to do site visits to the water and waste systems in their towns, and the hope for that was for them to begin to understand first kind of vulnerabilities and dependencies in these larger systems, and then to begin to be exposed to alternatives that could form the seeds for small businesses. And that was kind of thinking that we wanted to take into the next phase of the project, where our hope had been that the community currencies would provide an input into these micro enterprises that were linked to sustainability initiatives. So it was these two parallel tracks of interwoven tracks of understanding how people exchange value through the financial system, looking at what's working locally, and then beginning to understand the life support systems. And for the first year, we focused on water and waste. And in the second year, we moved on to energy.
So to give a concrete example, and we didn't really get to test this in the span of the project, which was the 2 years that you mentioned earlier. One of the projects that Anna mentioned earlier, the Kokstad Integrated Sustainable Development Plan, which is often sort of experts arriving and saying, well, these are the things that you need to do to make your town, sustainable over the next 30 years. So then 30 years, there's sufficient water, there's sufficient energy, there's et cetera, et cetera. So the experts come in with a top-down plan, which means absolutely nothing to the local residents. So as an example, one of the questions, so when the youngsters were looking at the water system, the questions we'd say is like, what would happen if you couldn't actually treat the water that you're extracting from the river? What would your plan be? What is the alternative? Just to show them how brittle their current systems are. Very centralized, very efficient, but very brittle at the same time. And one of the potential solutions was, and this is something that we had discussed with the local municipality, was for each little home to have its own a rainwater tank, so to harvest water from the roofs. And essentially, if you think about, what are the skills that are required to make, so we could actually build these tanks out of ferrous cement, you essentially need someone that has got plastering and building skills, and then somebody that has plumbing skills. So you could take two very distinct skills that are, maybe, don't have enough work because there isn't that much plumbing or plastering happening, and turn it into a potential business where the labor for the business gets paid for in the local community currency, and then the external inputs that probably have to be imported into the region would then be paid by the national currency. So in a way, the community would be co-funding the project, as opposed to expecting the municipality to provide all the work, the systems and the resilience building.
That's fantastic. I mean, to me, that there's so much in what you've just shared of the community being involved and seeing and telling their own story and deciding with you what things to work on and how to fund their own work, and really taking it to local decision making and throughout the whole process and envisionment of the whole process. That's great.
That's right. And the intention obviously is to marry you would still need a top-down expert, like big plan that the municipality would be doing, but to marry that with a bottom-up approach coming from the community itself.
Well, I don't even pretend to, in this very short time, to be able to dig into all the depths of what you guys have done. Fortunately, you've done, as I described earlier, a fantastic job, I think, in documenting. And one of the things that I want to promote in our community is the importance of doing that, because one, we forget, and two, there's no way of honoring all the work that was done if we don't take serious documenting what happened. Yeah. Right. So there are just the video content on your website alone, much less the putting it into the documents and the figuring out how to share it and the stories and the pictures and the articles and the book and all that. If you don't have that, it's very difficult to remember what happened, and for us to honor it and to see across projects, what did we learn and what can we do different and how can others be inspired. That's fantastic. So thank you for all that. So there's a lot more depth that folks can get into with that available. So what would you say were a couple of the key insights, or some of the key insights from this project, now that you have, as Anna said, a couple of years? You did take the time to do the reflection and the documentation, and it's been a couple of years. What would you say are some of the key insights and key experiences? Well, key insights and then key experiences or shifts in the population of the participants. What would be some of the key insights that you see?
Okay, I think for me, in terms of launching a community currency, it is really, really, really difficult to shift people's habits. And when I say habits, is people's habits in trusting a piece of paper, which is the fiat national currency. It's so the as many presentations as we might give, it requires a constant on the ground supporting of this translation of value. So for people to start seeing their own goods and services as valuable in another context is really, really hard. We had a challenge in terms of the funding, just in terms of just working with our sort of the bureaucratic structures, which meant that for a short period, a 6-month period, it was quite difficult for us to be fully on the ground in both the towns to support the rollout of the currency. So there was a bit of a hiatus period, which made it really, really difficult. And that was probably the most critical period. My sense is that without local champions, and when I say champions, it's more sort of from an institutional perspective. So what we were hoping was going to happen in the one region was that the municipality would step in and provide its weight to give credibility and to support the usage of the local currency. And then in the other region, the businesses, the small businesses or the more established businesses, the larger businesses, maybe the supermarkets would be the ones that would almost become the anchor support structures. So it's really, really, yeah. So that, I mean, that was my takeaway. It's extraordinarily difficult to get something up and running once people are used to it.
You also had a story going in that working with the community based on the previous work that you'd done, like in a lot of your architecture and all of your different projects, that would be successful. But here, taking it to another level with the Flow ambassadors and their training and their storytelling and their narrative making, and that seems to have worked. That actually was true, that you could get a bunch of these young folks involved in telling the story of their community.
So I think that the youth engagement was probably one of the most successful parts of the project and the place where there's been the most kind of enduring impact. I think some of the deepest learning for us came around the money system and working with these currencies. But and certainly from a change perspective, I think our greatest success there was opening a conversation that people have never had before. So just having that conversation for us feels like a success and an opening. And this is long work. This is not something that you can achieve in 2 years. So that, I mean, if we were to do this again, we'd do it over a 10-year period and ensure that there's enough capacity to carry it on. It's not something that you can do over 2 years, in our view. But in terms of the youth, and this is also something that, you know, how do we measure this? Not sure. But from having gone back a few times, it's in the young people that we see real change. You know, there is a huge sense of confidence that it was built in every single one of the young people that we work with. And I think for me, what I really take away is a sense of how each of those young people, almost without exception, had never been seen in their full potential. And we saw them like that. And something changes in people when you see them in their full potential. And even begin to name that full potential. So we saw that time and time again, that people who've never been trusted could and had no confidence 3 or 4 months later after engaging in this program had fallen in love with their town that they didn't really like very much before, and had begun to build confidence to stand in front of 200 people in a council meeting and be nervous but still do it. So there was an extraordinary amount of confidence building, as well as, I mean, with one young ambassador described it as seeing their town with new eyes, which kind of made me very happy to hear, because there were things that they didn't even know were valuable, like clean air or clean water, or strong community bonds, that they began to see as precious. Through the kind of through the way that they were being supported to look. So it was a different way of seeing. So I think that the people still talk about, when we go back today, about the personal change. There was also a very positive interaction that we had with the Bergrivier municipality. The municipal manager is an exceptional woman called Handy Linde, who's still there. And she gave us 100% support. She really opened the space in a big, generous way. And I think without her, it would have been very difficult to work in that area. Another one of her close colleagues called Tracy, who unfortunately she left, but she was with us for the first year. And Tracy Stone. She was absolutely fantastic too. So by having the support of these officials, and they were also willing to take a risk. So that was, you know, looking back, those were the things that enabled the project. That was of this kind of innovative, edgy nature, was the strong support of inside the institutions that we were working with. The same with UCT. You know, the university here in Cape Town was really willing to step out on a limb. So we were surrounded by institutions and individuals in those institutions that were willing to step out. It's the same with our funders. So there was a real opening, and I think that's what enables this kind of work is a willingness to step into unknown places and not really know the outcome, even though our kind of funding requirements, the funders generally require, clear deliverables and outcomes, but we'd had that, but there was still room to play. And I think that enabled a lot of the innovation.
That's fantastic. To me, this is a great example of what we call in the O process is that if we can see and name a future to which we give our love, a deeper shared purpose, then we can start to see what voices are required to be able to engage that project. And this is such a great example for the people in that community and in South Africa, and I think everywhere, in our community, vibrancy community, of what a couple people can take on. So you involved community, two very different communities. You can involve the universities, government, the national government, foreign governments, local businesses, a whole bunch of experts, people donating their phones, the youth, just all the local governments, and that you were able to see that, and that these voices are required. And most people don't see to include any of those, much less try to figure out how to involve all of those. So as lovely as academia is in this case, it's not obvious to bring in academia and a national government and local government and youth and filmmaking and business and currencies and all these things. And at the end of the day, it's a simple project, right? Can a community see itself and say yes to supporting itself going forward? Mm-hmm. And to show whether we achieved all of the outcomes that we wanted, whether there were massive shifts from the baseline that you took, to show that it's possible and that two people with a love for that future can say yes, and that people will come together around that imagination. And we don't have to tell you a story just because we can show you on YouTube. We can show you in their stories of their experience of this, what happens, that it is possible. And that's completely different than looking at like the situation that you're in now in Cape Town and saying it's impossible to deal with the water issue. Mm-hmm. I think there's so many, and I thank you very much to wrap this up. I think there's so many things that we don't think about, first of all, at all, or we think are impossible if we do think about. And then, as you know, one of my favorite saying is when somebody says, I don't see how, and I said, you're done with the statement. I get that you can't see it, but just because you can't see it doesn't mean it can't be seen. Mm-hmm. And they don't always lead to the outcomes we want the first 83 times. Right? But that somebody else says, I saw what you did and I took it a step further. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't even think about it, nor I didn't even think it was possible. And now I know it is, and I have somebody to reach out to. Mm-hmm. So, and then you've documented it so beautifully. So, and as hard as it was in sharing how hard it was, and yet you still did it. So I'm very grateful for that. So thank you. Very moving and beautiful project. So a project, very time with the community. Yeah. We don't even have the right words for these kinds of things. Right? So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for giving us the space.
Thank you.
To share.